you go online, you can find a bunch of things about Marvel Power Rankings. And I went through and I was looking through multiple people taking all of the characters that have ever existed in the Marvel comics and making power rankings and associating them. And I thought to myself, because this is what's happening, right? What's happening is in our world today, or in the MCU world today, as the MCU draws more characters into its fold from the comics, it starts to get very confusing as to where does everybody fit. Now, the reason why this question came up in my mind was I'm watching this show about Egyptian gods, and I'm going, does that mean that Khonshu has the same power level as Thor, or is he like above Thor, or is he below Thor? And then where do we get like Dormammu's interdimensional being? We have Celestials now that seem incredibly powerful. So basically, Daryl, what I wanted to do was I just wanted to talk through this scenario where we can say, I have 3 questions for you. I sent these to you in advance. So this is going to be a fairly open conversation, but let's start with this. Who are kind of like the bottom tier entities in the Marvel Cinematic? Who are the people that are like, okay, they're not super powered. Maybe they're lower level powered if we're thinking about this.
Oh boy, there's so many qualifications to this. So like,
I know, it's not going to be perfect. So just let us say this: I would love to hear your comments in the thoughts below on this, or in the comments below, because this is going to be very complex, and we're not going to be able to do this justice. So just caveat upon caveat upon caveat. But I still want to talk about it because I think it's kind of a fascinating kind of topic as we look at like who's entering because we're gonna get Doctor Strange in the multiverse of madness, and that's gonna be bonkers. You can tell by the previews.
mm-hmm.
So these things are interesting to me. So what would you say? Who are some of the least powerful entities in the MCU?
So okay, a couple qualifications I guess I have to ask about for our purposes, for our imperfect discussion about this. Are we considering people who have no inherent power whatsoever and get their quote unquote power from tools like Iron Man, stuff like that?
So
or does it have to be some sort of supernatural power that's within them?
Well, let's say this. Let's say that Tony Stark, and I'm not gonna, I'm gonna say this, and I don't want to follow this line of thinking because this would be way too complicated. But Tony Stark without the Iron Man suit is just a dude, right?
Yeah.
Like so, I would say that like you know, to me, there's like human level lower power, and that's like Hawkeye. He's really good at what he does. But so I think that Tony Stark without the suit fits into that category, but Tony Stark with the suit probably bumps him up a little bit. So that's kind of how I would define that a little bit. Is just if we have this conversation.
Because if you follow that line of thinking, if you remove people who are just using tools per se, you have to take Doctor Strange out of it.
Interesting.
Because in reality, he has no power. He's a normal guy who learned the mystic arts. So that has 2 implications to it. 1, technically, he has no power within himself.
Yeah.
And 2, that means anybody can be as powerful as Doctor Strange, which is frightening.
True. Which is crazy. Yeah.
But if we're not going down that rabbit hole, then I mean, I would put the lower tier as being those characters that are dependent on some sort of tool in the moment to give them their power. So your Iron Mans, your War Machines. I would even put Captain America in that category because it's a chemical inside of his body that makes him that way. I would say the same thing about Black Panther. You know, without the heart-shaped herb, he's just a normal dude.
Interesting.
So that's kind of where my head fell on that is if you can remove from the person what makes them powerful, for me, they kind of fall on that lower tier.
Lowest tier, yeah. Actually, I think that's a really good distinction to make because it just occurs to me that like that's what makes so many of the Marvel characters inherently interesting to us is that they are us just with a slight change in their life, right? Like you're this person, and then boom, this happens to you, and now you're part of the Avengers. Because even Peter Parker, right? Like even Peter Parker he's a lower tiered. He doesn't inherently have that. He has to get bit by a spider before he really has those things.
Yeah, but you can't take it away from him, as far as I know. There's no way to
That's true.
take Peter's power away. You can't like with Tony, you take him out of the suit, he's done.
Yeah, yeah,
With
yeah.
Steve Rogers, take the serum out of his blood, normal guy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, but I don't think you can do that with Spider-Man. But
Yeah, maybe not.
based on what he does, it seems like his power is only his strength, and
Mm,
well, I
mm.
guess in his ability to cling to things. But
Yeah. And depending on whether or not which one you follow, maybe it's shooting things out of your wrists or not, or building something
yeah,
that shoots things out of your wrists. That's really interesting. So
sorry, I was no, go ahead.
no. I was just gonna say, like, let's go ahead and talk about what the middle tier characters
Yeah,
are then, because like obviously like what you just based on the description that we just came up with, a bunch of the lower tier characters could be considered almost approaching the middle tier when they have their accoutrement activated, right? Like but who's solidly in the middle tier because their power is innate, right?
yeah. I think this is where you can put characters like the Eternals,
Ah,
um, because the Eternals, they made them seem like these all powerful, like why didn't you help fight Thanos and all this kind of stuff.
yeah,
If you look at each individual Eternal, which by the way, spoiler for the Eternals movie, if you have not seen it,
yeah,
okay, I gave you enough time. They're all robots. they're
yeah.
they're not even they're not even beings. They're robots in a
Oh, that's
sense.
interesting. Yeah, that's kind of
So,
true.
and they each have most of them have one power,
Yeah,
and that's it.
yeah.
So each one individually is not going to be like a top tier powered character.
Right, right. I totally
So
agree with that because I think
maybe Icarus, because he's kind of like the Marvel version of Superman, but still, I wouldn't put any of them at the top.
well, I don't think I would either. So you got the Eternals in the middle. I think I'd put Thor in the middle, right? Like any of the Norse gods they're inherently imbued with their power. They're born with their power.
Hmm.
Now, granted, Thor has Mjolnir or what is the other one? Stormbreaker.
Stormbreaker.
Yeah,
But
he
as we
has
saw in Ragnarok, he doesn't need them.
exactly,
He's still the god of thunder with or
exactly.
without those tools.
Exactly. And this is where you'd find Captain Marvel going from a lower tier, maybe even into the middle tier, if you were to give her give her abilities.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that middle tier makes up what I would basically call like and by the way, I saw some of the people online in their lists do really compelling arguments for like how many tiers there are and why there's this many tiers and like who falls into what tier. But see, that's for the comics. We haven't gotten into that in the MCU yet, so
Yeah.
we're still trying to figure this out because I would agree that the Eternals fit in the middle tier, Thor fits in the middle tier. Some of the other heroes that we talked about being in the lower tier who have the thing with them already kind of fit in the second tier. But this is where it gets interesting. Like the Egyptian gods, to me, the Egyptian gods don't inherently feel more powerful than Thor is, but they're then imbuing the characters below them, like Moon Knight, so he seems like a lower character based on the definition that we were just talking about. But the Egyptian gods seem like they're not any more powerful than the Eternals might be.
Well, as Moon Knight has shown us thus far, it doesn't seem like the Egyptian gods can do much of anything without an avatar,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
So it would seem they have some mental influence,
Right.
obviously,
Right.
which can be extremely dangerous. I mean, if there's one Eternal that's more powerful than the rest, I would probably give it to Druig because he can
Mm.
control people's minds,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
you know, thousands and thousands at a time.
Yeah.
But physically powerful, we haven't seen the Egyptian gods do anything other than control some crazy people so far.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, just because you brought him up, there are people who are now Marvel and DC characters. He's one of them, right? Like he's
Sort
Joker
of.
and
Yeah,
he's
he wasn't
Joker
in the
and
movie, but yeah.
yeah,
He's
sort
a
of in the end. But
deleted scene.
um then you also have characters who are multiple MCU characters. So Oscar Isaac is 3 different MCU characters.
Yeah.
So it's pretty wild. It's kind of fun. We live in a bizarre world where you can say, yeah, I'm part of the DC universe and I'm part of the Marvel universe.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about Celestials. Let's talk about Dormammu. Let's talk about Ego. I guess you could even bring in the AI that gives Captain, or that is involved in Captain Marvel's powers. Like, now those seem to me
Oh, the
like they're
supreme intelligence.
the supreme intelligence. Those seem to me like they're above the middle tier.
Yes. However,
Mm,
I think this gets back to what we were talking about with Moon Knight too.
mm,
They all do seem to be of that physical prowess, of that level of power,
yeah.
but they also seem to be completely hindered by whatever their context is. Like, yes,
Ah,
Celestials, they create planets, they destroy planets. Like,
yeah.
that's insanely powerful.
Yeah.
But why? Like, what are they thinking about? Like, what's behind that? Um, so yes, they may be all powerful, but they're also seemingly only doing it for the case of creating or destroying.
Mm.
It's so weird. It's like they're insanely powerful, but kind of stupid.
Yeah, they don't seem like
So,
they have a
which
lot of free will to do whatever they want to. They kind of just got to do
yeah, which
whatever they do.
to me, if you take seemingly limitless, we don't understand it yet levels of power
Yeah.
and pair it with somebody who struggles with things like compassion and redemption and understanding other people,
Right.
you get what is probably the most powerful being to me in the MCU, which is Wanda Maximoff.
Ah, interesting. I
That's
was
where I'm
gonna
at.
interesting. Wanda's the most powerful being in the MC. So here's I'm gonna go.
Potentially.
I'm gonna go. I think that there might be one being that is more powerful than. Okay, so this is actually, I think
Kevin Feige.
Dale brings up a good point. It's Kevin Feige. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I was Dale kind of was leading off with what I was just going to talk about, because it feels to me like Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet is, whoever has the Infinity Gauntlet, but especially Thanos, seems like the most powerful character in the entire MCU.
Yeah, but then again, based on what we're talking about, that actually puts Thanos way down at the bottom tier, or maybe at the second because he's super strong without the
Yeah.
Infinity Gauntlet. But again, that's a tool, right?
Right. Exactly. So this would be interesting, is like, so because the Infinity Gauntlet by definition, like, let's just take any other character and put them up against, because Dale here says, what about Tony Stark with the Infinity Gauntlet? Wouldn't he be
Yeah,
similar?
or
And
Hulk
it
with the Infinity Gauntlet.
Yeah, exactly. And I would argue that those characters, given the any character given the Infinity Gauntlet, because you have omniscience, you have all power, you have the ability to change time and space. Like, even Dormammu, who is annoyed by Doctor Strange, right? Like, the Doctor Strange beats Dormammu not because he's any stronger, but because he is able to use time in a way that Dormammu is not able to overcome.
Yeah,
But Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet, it's like, you want to go back in time, bro? Let's go. We can go as far as you want. Like, he could have reversed some of the things that Doctor Strange was trying to do. So it'll be interesting to see if the MCU can, if they're going to, or even if they want to, create another powered level that is Affinity Gauntlet level power, right? Like, because that's the ultimate
yeah.
power.
Well, it seems like Kang the Conqueror might be up
Mm,
there.
mm.
We'll see.
Yes, we're gonna have Galactus at some point too, right? Like, Galactus is gonna be in the
It's
MCU.
like we'd have to. I mean, if we
Yeah,
get the Fantastic Four, we'll definitely have Galactus.
exactly. Yeah,
But
exactly.
again,
So
Galactus is another one of those ones that has this gigantic. He's a world eater. He's got this gigantic power, and he's huge. But why?
yeah,
You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like,
yeah. Yeah. Well, what's interesting too is we haven't seen some of the characters that are in the comics universe, because there's this inherent. This is what's really fascinating to me, is that, like, the MCU can kind of say, we'll bring in the Egyptian gods, and the only way that they're really truly able to do that is because we kind of don't view the Egyptian gods as being real. Like, if we're being honest with ourselves, like, there's some
mhm.
might be some people that worship them, but generally in the West, and we're making these movies in the West, generally speaking, we don't believe the Egyptian gods are real. We believe they are fiction. And because of that, they can include them. Because I was just thinking about this, and like, we know that Captain America has we don't know what his specific belief system is, but it's definitely Judeo-Christian leaning, as the
Yeah.
founders of America kind of leaned. So we
There's
hear
only
him
one
pray to
God, man,
God.
and he doesn't dress like that.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And that kind of viewpoint would suggest that there's a being over everything. And actually there is in the Marvel comics, because in my research I realized that there's like the one above all, right? Who's like this, I don't even know if they ever describe who he is or what he does, but it's like, so but then you have all these lesser beings, and you have beings like Mephisto, which is, Mephisto is going to probably be acting a little bit more like what you'd call like the devil, right? In some ways, because Mephisto and the devil kind of go hand in hand
Yeah,
in other
yeah.
mythologies. But again, because those in the West are beliefs that like people still hold, it creates this really strange dynamic where you can't really introduce them at all, because it's like, no, that would be like too weird to introduce them. It's like, but we can take these other characters and say that they're just kind of super powered, because I think at the end of the day, this is what's interesting about mythology, is that, and this is the impetus for this conversation really, is that mythology says that the gods are intra universe. They're a part of an existing universe.
Hmm.
Whereas many religions would view God as extra universe, right? Like
And having created the
having
universe.
created the universe.
Yeah.
So you immediately take that, like, that any characters that exist in this world are immediately unproportionately powered to that god, right? So you have to do this intra universe god creation, character creation, and it's very fascinating to see how the MCU is managing that overall. And
Yeah.
it's I would say overall it's pretty fun, and I think they've been doing a pretty good job. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's hard because if you really dig into it and really
Mhm.
look at how you would maybe approach it in real life, it's radically flawed. But
Yeah, yeah.
it's also super fun, great stuff to watch. Some of my favorite things are in the MCU. Like,
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. I love it. But, like any universe, like it's fun to talk about this in the context of movies because this has been a problem with comics for decades. But is escalation. Like,
Mm,
it's like, well, we have this most powerful being in this story, and now we want to tell a bigger story and make an even bigger threat for our heroes. So we have to come up with something bigger, but that means we need a hero who's big enough to go against that. And it just keeps going and going and going to the point where eventually you have this gigantic mess of characters that your reader, or in this case your viewer, knows can do way more than you're showing them doing.
right.
And then suddenly you have the Superman problem, which is why it's so hard to tell a story with Superman, because he should be able to pretty much do anything or
Right.
deal with anything. And it's so hard to create something that is a real problem for him,
Right.
you
Right.
know? And so
Yeah.
it's kind of the same thing in the Marvel universe. The farther they go, the more we get of this and the harder it becomes to manage. Like, I was looking at some of these same lists and some videos and stuff like that, and it's really interesting that a lot of the ones that I see that are recent will put Wanda way at the top of the list.
Uh,
But ones that came out before Endgame or before WandaVision
mhm.
would put her pretty far down the list
Yeah.
because they just hadn't introduced what she did in WandaVision yet. And
Right.
the fact that her power maybe didn't completely come from the Mind Stone. Maybe she had something in her before that, and
Right.
we don't fully understand it. And obviously, she can do insanely crazy things that we don't know yet. So
Right. Right.
that's the problem of expanding the universe, is eventually it's just going to be completely unmanageable. But
Yeah.
as long as you tell fun stories and they're engaging, that's okay.
That's true. Going back to Moon Knight really quickly, I did find it very interesting that uh, one of the things that Arthur Harrow said to Steven was, he says, you have a lot of chaos in you. Now, chaos is a
Hmm.
generic term, right? Like, it could mean that you have dissociative disorder, and so you have lots of personalities in you, or whatever he means. But part of me thought to myself for a second, like, are they suggesting that there's chaos magic that is something to do with
Oh yeah,
what is going on with him? Because it would be really fascinating if that were true. Then it means that he would actually not need to rely on Khonshu. Khonshu is maybe a vehicle for him to draw on his strength, but it doesn't. If the chaos is actually in him, the chaos magic is actually in him, he could do some of those things without having Khonshu involved at all, which would be really interesting.
Another little connection like that. I don't remember if it was Khonshu or Ahmet, but we saw the part where one of them like hit their staff on the ground, and Hera was talking about how there's a little sliver of power in that staff.
It was all pink. Yeah.
It was purple.
Purple, yeah.
Like Power Stone purple. So
exactly. Yeah, who knows? That's really cool.